Who is protecting our president? You say it's the Secret Service. But you'd be just as accurate to say the president's life is in the hands of a bunch of government bureaucrats. If the old image of a Secret Service agent is a guy in a suit with black sunglasses, the new image would be a guy sitting at a desk drowning in red tape.
Reports have surfaced, and they've shown that President Obama was in danger several times over the last month. Now, the head of the Secret Service has resigned in disgrace, and as Jennifer Wishon reports, more bad news may be on the way.
Julia Pearson resigned abruptly, only 24 hours after defending herself and the Secret Service she served for 30 years. Americans on both sides of the political aisle shook their heads, stunned that a once renowned law enforcement agency now finds it difficult to protect the first family, and in at least one case, even put the president in danger.
She believed that it was in the best interest of the agency to which she has dedicated her career.
Pearson decided to resign after she realized Congress had lost confidence in her ability to lead. Disappointing testimony on Capitol Hill led to bipartisan scolding.
This is disgraceful. This is absolutely disgraceful that this has happened.
Members from both parties called for her resignation.
And the president concluded that new leadership of that agency was required.
The Secretary of Homeland Security is putting together an independent panel to look at security procedures at the White House. It will also recommend possible replacements for Pearson. And the person who's picked can expect a tough confirmation before Congress.
House Homeland Security Chairman Michael McCaul says, quote, the growing list of failures from U.S. Secret Service seems to be more pervasive than just its leadership. And in a letter to the president, Ranking Committee member Benny Thompson writes, the Secret Service needs a seasoned law enforcement professional who is not a product of the Secret Service to bring about needed reforms. Relying on luck cannot be an operational strategy. And stay tuned. It may get worse. Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz, the man leading the congressional inquiry, says he's been in contact with whistleblowers. And more stories about the Secret Service are out there. Some suggest the agency lost its gusto after 9/11, when it was moved from the Department of Treasury to the Department of Homeland Security, a massive bureaucratic agency that some argue is overwhelmed and out of control.
Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
This thing happened, ladies and gentlemen, and it's endemic to what, it's not just the Secret Service, it is the whole Department of Homeland Security. Where'd that come from? Well, it was a Bush-era thing. George Bush, I think, had an MBA, and this looked great on a piece of paper, but you've got over 200,000 people in disparate agencies, and they're getting torn all to pieces. Now, I have here a diagram of what that monstrosity looks like. But I just want to show you here these right. Could you get close up down on these down here? There you go. All right. Well, what do we have? Look at all those people. They've got you've got customs, and you've got let's see. Well, you have immigration. You have all the matter with customs. You have FEMA. You have these various other agencies, and over here is the Secret Service, which used to be under Treasury and now isn't. And over here is the worst of all, is what's called the TSA, the Transportation Safety Administration. And that one agency alone has 50, I can't read this, it's 55,000 employees. The Secret Service has about 6,000. ICE, Immigration and Customs, has about 20,000 employees. FEMA has about 14,000 employees, and the Coast Guard has another 5 or so. All right, all these together make up Homeland Security. It was a monstrosity, 200,000 people, and the morale is shot to pieces because none of these people can have pride that they should. I ran into that mess of FEMA when I was down there in Katrina. They couldn't do anything right. It was unbelievable, the mismanagement and the confusion that came about with FEMA. Who'd they put in charge of FEMA? The man who used to be the executive director of the Arabian Horse Association. That doesn't qualify you for disaster relief. What's happening at the border? Well, you've got customs and immigration. You've got thousands of people pouring across the border. But I think the problem that many of us face when we go to an airport is that these incredible lines, and as one guy told me jokingly, he said, TSA stands for thousands standing around. Thousands and thousands of make-work positions for people who weren't qualified. They just jammed them in because they had a box on an org chart they had to fulfill. Now, we're going to give you a full rundown of what's happening, but in my opinion, we need to take this thing and deal with it, and this whole department needs to be ripped apart. It's too big, it's too unwieldy. One human being can't possibly take care of all these people and all these disparate functions, and the time has come for Congress to say, well, it was a good experiment, but we messed up. FEMA needs to be independent. The Treasury Department needs to be in charge of the White House protection detail. We ought to go back to where we were, and as far as airport security, I think we could cut about 2/3 of them out and not miss a beat. So we'll tell you more about it, but just to give you a feeling, over 200,000 people, and there's a dysfunctional agency, is the worst you can conceive of. And in terms of making security to any of us, it's a joke. Well, fear is spreading in the heartland now that Ebola has come to America. But health officials say they're confident they can stop this deadly disease. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
Pat, the Ebola patient hospitalized in Dallas is listed in serious condition, but he's alert and able to pray with his family over the phone. The effort to keep Ebola from spreading is in high gear, but as Mark Martin reports, now comes word that another state may be dealing with a possible infection.
Custodians dressed in white hazmat suits scrub and disinfect schools in Dallas. That's because officials say 5 children could have been exposed to Ebola after they had contact with the patient, Thomas Eric Duncan, an African who traveled from Liberia to Dallas.
We have additional nurses on staff so that if kids feel like they have a question about their health, or the parents do, they can come in and get their questions answered.
Centers for Disease Control investigators are on the ground in Dallas, hoping to keep the virus from spreading. Texas Governor Rick Perry is in battle mode.
This is all hands on deck.
Dallas area hospitals, schools, and entire neighborhoods are on high alert. Investigators want to be sure Duncan did not infect others. Texas isn't the only state. Medical officials in Hawaii are monitoring a patient for symptoms that may be Ebola.
The hospital is being very careful, as they should be, to take precautions, make sure the patient is in isolation, and make sure that their people and the public stay safe.
Meanwhile, CBN's Operation Blessing is in Liberia, working with local churches to educate the public about the disease, and has shipped and distributed medical supplies. Mark Martin, CBN News.
And as you can imagine, many Americans are wondering, should I worry about a possible Ebola outbreak? CBN's health reporter Lori Johnson tells us what we should know and what healthcare workers are doing to prevent the virus from spreading.
A person exposed to Ebola can begin to show symptoms within 2 to 21 days. At first, there's usually a high fever, headache, and fatigue. Those initial symptoms are followed by diarrhea, vomiting, and bleeding.
It's a severe disease which has a high case fatality rate, even with the best of care. But there are core, tried and true public health interventions that stop it.
Starting with education.
The good news is Ebola is not nearly as contagious as many other viruses. For one thing, Ebola does not spread through the air like the flu.
Ebola only spreads from direct contact with bodily fluids like blood, saliva, or sweat. However, it only takes a speck, and the contact can be as minor as a handshake. Although a person may be infected with Ebola, they're only contagious when symptoms show up. The key to containing the disease is a process called contact tracing. The patient identifies anyone they've touched since becoming symptomatic. Those contacts are monitored for 21 days and are isolated if symptoms begin.
I have no doubt that we'll stop this in its tracks in the U.S., but I also have no doubt that as long as the outbreak continues in Africa, we need to be on our guard.
An Ebola outbreak is over if there are no new cases after 2 consecutive incubation periods or 42 days. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
And doctors say a strong immune system helps protect against Ebola and other viruses. All next week on the 700 Club, we'll be giving you practical tips on how to strengthen your immune system just in time for cold and flu season. As a bonus, we're giving away DVDs and offering the information in a convenient download free of charge. And Pat, all that will be available at cbn.com.
They have traced the route of that Ebola sufferer. He went from Liberia to Brussels, and then he went from Brussels to Dulles, and then he went from Dulles to Dallas, and then he traveled hither and yon. On top of that, he contacted any number of people, and we don't know yet if any of them might be symptomatic for that disease. We don't know for sure, but the multiplication is enormous. You know, you get on one plane, then you get on one bus, and then you get on one other subway, and the next thing you know, there are thousands of potential cases. That's why it can, mutate so rapidly. And we don't know for sure what that disease. You can say, well, you don't have to worry about this because it's contact. Those viruses have a way of changing to beat you any chance they get. It is an amazing, the mutation process that they go through. And AIDS has done that, and this Ebola will undoubtedly do the same thing. Well, in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, the greatest friend we have in the Middle East is the nation of Israel. But you'd never know it if you listen to what comes out of the White House. John.
Pat, the White House publicly rebuked Israel Wednesday. Press Secretary Josh Earnest accused Israel of provoking the Palestinians by planning to build new housing in East Jerusalem. All this happened after President Obama and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met in the Oval Office. Obama used the meeting to address Palestinian civilian deaths during the war between Israel and the Islamic terrorist group Hamas. Netanyahu focused on what he called a more pressing issue, Iran's nuclear capabilities.
As you know, Mr. President, Iran seeks a deal that would lift the tough sanctions that you worked so hard to put in place and leave it as a threshold nuclear power. And I fervently hope that under your leadership that would not happen.
This is the first time the two world leaders have met since the 51-day war between Israel and Hamas this summer. But Pat, this is not the first time there's been discord between the Obama administration and Israel.
Well, like it or not, Obama's pro-Muslim. He just is pro-Muslim because that has been his orientation in his early life. He attended a Muslim school. His stepfather was a Muslim in Indonesia. Not a very rabid one, but nevertheless one, and that's his orientation. So why would he dislike them? But you know, just think of this. The United States decides it wants to build some housing in Washington, D.C. because the housing is subpar, and they like to tear down some tenements and build some real modern housing to handle more people. Can you imagine Germany coming to us and saying, don't you dare build, that'll be an affront to the poor black people who live in Anacostia or whatever. I mean, you just tell them to take a hike. It would be outrageous. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and Israel has a perfect right to build housing for its citizens in its own capital. And for the United States of America to take umbrage at that and to criticize the Prime Minister of Israel for building housing in his own capital, it's an absolute outrage.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas wants the UN Security Council to force Israel to pull out completely from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The draft resolution calls for a pullout by November 2016 It includes an end to all Israeli military operations and settlement activities in biblical Judea and Samaria. He's also demanding open border crossings to the Gaza Strip. Abbas says Israel should get out of all the territories it won in the 1967 Six-Day War. The resolution faces an almost certain U.S. veto in the Security Council. Police are searching for a man who attacked a Christian evangelist with pepper spray. The attack happened at Montana State University against evangelist Sean Holes. Holes was able to duck during the attack, but the spray still hit part of his face and neck. The unidentified suspect then ran away. Holes told the Bozeman Daily Chronicle the attacker was a young man in a hooded sweatshirt. The evangelist says he's been on campus before and students have always been kind to him. Remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website, cbnnews.com.